My objective in this presentation is to show you how to develop a race plan, which should help you achieve your best performance possible on the day itself. Just in case you need reminding, the Marmotte is a major physical and mental challenge, including 4 huge climbs, which add up in total to over 65 kilometers of climbing, and a day that's significantly longer than a typical Tour de France day in the mountains. Most people will take between 8 and 12 hours to finish, and there are always plenty who abandon every year. Last year the weather was quite bad, and so there was an even bigger number of people who abandoned. Let's hope for better weather this year. There are 2 essential things to get right for a successful ride: pacing, especially on the climbs, and fueling. Both of these require a proper race plan to get right, and then the ability to stick to it. So we're going to talk about both of those over the next half an hour or so. Benjamin Franklin wasn't a cyclist, of course, but his quote is still highly relevant. Those who fail to plan, plan to fail. You need a plan for how you're going to taper so that you're in the best possible condition for the event. Plan for your travel and final preparations so that all goes smoothly without any stress. And then, of course, a plan for the race itself, broken down into sections, how you're going to pace it, what you're going to eat and drink, the clothing you're going to have, etc. And finally, you need a plan for how you're going to remember this during the event. It's all very well to have a plan written down, but if you immediately forget it, it's effectively useless. Let's talk first about the taper. So as I speak, there are only 17 days left before the Marmotte. Some people should be doing their last long hard rides this weekend. Others can carry on training hard for another week. Tapering is highly individual, and what works for one person may not work for another. To put it simply, your taper should be longer if you are older, less fit, less strong, or especially if you recover slowly, and shorter if you're relatively young, very fit, very strong, and especially if you recover quickly. But if in doubt, it's better to back off sooner. You risk more than you stand to gain. Remember, the goal of the taper is to eliminate fatigue without losing fitness. You're not going to lose any fitness in 5 to 7 days. Training hard right up to the event is very risky for little payoff. So if in doubt, back off. It's the message. My general suggestion is to reduce training volume by at least 50% in the final few days and to limit the intensity as well. Maybe not down to 0, but again, that's individual. And particularly for very strong riders, an aggressive taper can be beneficial. So a very strong rider can perhaps keep training hard, certainly up to a week before the event, and then can taper with quite a lot of intensity during the taper. I've personally learned that that doesn't work for me, and I'm better off being fully rested, but then I'm older than most of you, so it may not apply to you. You've got to figure it out for yourself. The next part of your planning concerns your travel and final preparations leading up to the start. This is mostly common sense, but it's much better to think it through and plan it out in advance so you don't get caught in a last-minute panic. So plan your travel carefully, confirm your accommodation. When I say confirm it, I mean confirm it, because sometimes you get a nasty surprise when you arrive. Book your evening meal in advance. The restaurants get very full, both in Alpe d'Huez and down in Bourg-d'Oisans. When you're ready to start packing, it's a good idea to use a checklist for your kit so you don't forget anything. If you'd like a copy of our checklist, it's on the screen there. You can send me an email at info@alpinecols.com and I'm happy to send it to you. Finally, pack your bike a day in advance in case of any last-minute issues. So now let's look at your event plan. Your pacing strategy is going to depend on your objective, which could be trying to win, achieving a personal best, finishing before the cutoff and therefore getting the finisher's medal, or simply enjoying the ride, come what may. Each of these objectives is perfectly valid, but they require a different pacing strategy. If you want to win, you've got no choice. You must ride with the lead group and bide your time to attack, most probably on the final climb. But if you lose touch with the lead group, you have no chance of winning, obviously. So pacing there is relatively straightforward if you've got the level, if you've got the ability to do it. If your goal is a personal best, you must ride, or to do your best possible on the day, whether it's a personal best or not, you must ride as close as possible to your current limit without ever going over them. Gaining 2 or 3 minutes by riding hard on the Glandon, for example, can cost you 10 minutes on the later climbs. So your current limit is lower on the Glandon than it would be if you were only climbing the Glandon. I hope that's obvious. For most people, 70 to 75% of your FTP or your maximum heart rate will be the maximum sustainable pace throughout the Marmotte, corresponding to upper zone 2, which is the endurance zone. But if you're particularly well trained and a strong rider, you should be able to push this to 80% in tempo, or even close to threshold at 85% or so. We'll look at how to determine this for yourself in a few minutes. But again, for most of us, it's going to be in the 70 to 75% range. Now, if your goal is only to finish, you need to work backwards from the cutoff time on the Galibier and make sure you get there in time. Because if you miss that, you're not, you can still ride up to Alpe d'Huez, but you're not an official finisher. So give yourself a time objective to be at the foot of the telegraph and another to be on the summit of the Galibier. If you get over the Galibier in time, the next cutoff is at the foot of the final climb at 5:30. So I reckon a reasonable objective to be on the Galibier is 3:15, knowing that at 3:30 you're cut off. Okay, so aim at 3:15, and then if something goes, if you're slower on the last part of the Galibier than you thought, you'll still be okay. Now, the distance between the top of the Galibier and the foot of the climb to Alpe d'Huez is 46 kilometers, and it's nearly all downhill. The fastest riders do this in about 1 hour, and anyone who's going to finish should easily be able to do it in less than 2 hours. You've got 2 hours to do it because, again, the cutoff on the Galibier is 3:30. The cutoff at the bottom of Alpe d'Huez is 5:30, so you've got 2 hours to get there. So that means the vital cutoff is the Galibier, and just to be clear. Now, this objective of enjoying the ride is rather different to the others because enjoy the ride means different things to different people. If it's important for you to finish, then obviously you should follow the advice I just gave you. But if you don't care whether you finish or not, your pacing is determined by your level of enjoyment and perhaps by the people you're riding with. Ignore the competitors and take advantage of the magnificent scenery and just have a great day out. Okay, now let's come back to the case where your goal is to do the best possible on the day. Here you have to ride as close as possible to your limits as they stand on the day without ever going over that limit. So how to know where those limits are? That's what we're going to look at now. Here's a quote from Matt Fitzgerald, who's one of the world's foremost experts on pacing. He wrote a great book on it. Getting your pacing right means constantly asking yourself, can I sustain this effort level for the remaining distance? Or am I going a little too fast, about right, or a little too slow? And therefore I need to adjust it. Although you should be asking yourself these questions all the time, the answer is going to vary depending on where you are on the course. So let's take a look at 4 different points where your pacing decisions might change. These are at the start, on the climbs, in the valleys, and on the final climb. So we'll look at each of those points in turn. At the start, the race always starts very fast. There are 15 kilometers to ride until the foot of the Glandon, mostly on the flat. It makes sense to try to stay with a group that's slightly stronger than you, but not to overdo it and burn too many matches. So the best advice is to choose a wheel to follow and try to ride as fast as possible for the least effort. You should be again, in upper zone 2, really, maybe a little bit in zone 3, but you should not be regularly pushing into zone 4 and 5 to stay in the wheel. If you lose the first wheel or the rider turns out to be too slow, just jump across to another one. Remember, there's a very long way to go, so don't get carried away, especially on the short climb to the dam. which is after about 11 or 12 kilometers, where every year I see people make literally zone 5 efforts up the short climbs, about 200 meters, to stay with a group that they're certain to lose a few kilometers to further on. It makes no sense. Now on the climbs. The best way to see the climbs is as a series of individual time trials. Ignore everybody else and ride at your own pace, which should be the highest pace which you feel you can sustain to the end. Be conservative on the glandon, however, because you'll be feeling fresh and strong, so you'll be tempted to overdo it. Remember, it's usually more effective to start slow and finish fast than the opposite. You also need to reduce your pace by 5 or 10% on the galibier because of the altitude. Okay, so that needs to be taken into account as well. Now in the valleys, there are two major valley transitions. The first is 22 kilometers of falls flat climb up the Maurienne Valley to the Telegraph, and then 37 kilometers down the Vallée d'Oison from the Col du Lautaret to Bourg d'Oison. Your objective in the Maurienne Valley should be to reach the Telegraph with the least energy spent possible. So stay in a group and spin. Eat and drink. You need to use this stretch to complete your recovery from the glandon and prepare for the long haul to the top of the galibier. If you do find yourself alone, slow down and wait for the next group to catch you up from behind. They definitely won't be more than 30 seconds or a minute behind. Okay, so it's better to lose that time now rather than to push on hard and really dig into your energy supply. Your goal, once you're over the Galibier and coming down the Oison Valley, should be to reach the foot of Alpe d'Huez as rested as possible and above all well refueled. Most of it is a gentle descent on which unfortunately you have to pedal continuously to maintain a good pace. On top of that, there's often a headwind, so you really do have to pedal. Beware of several dark tunnels and a couple of unexpected climbs towards the end that can cause cramps if you take them too hard. So it's really important during that long falls flat descent to focus on refueling and rehydrating. It's a transition, and it'll take between an hour and an hour and a half. So you've got plenty of time to eat and drink and get ready for the final climb. So finally, on the final climb to Alpe d'Huez, first, make sure you stop at the feed station and take on enough water and fuel to get to the top. You'll need at least one full bottle, more if it's hot. Don't hesitate to take 2 full bottles if it's a hot day. The first 3 kilometers until La Garde are very hard, with long ramps at 11 to 12% and flat corners. So that's why the average that you'll see on the profile is not 12%, but the ramps themselves are at between 11 and 12. But the corners reduce the average. So climb this first part at an easy pace and wait for the exit of the village to increase the tempo. From this point on, the energy you saved at the cost of a few seconds on the glandon should start to pay back in minutes. If you've managed your effort just right, you should be able to accelerate progressively and overtake dozens of other riders in the last few kilometers. Feels great if you can do that. Now, none of what I've said so far tells you exactly how hard to ride in terms of an actual number. I've talked about judging your pace to be as close as possible to your limit for the distance, but this isn't easy to do. Importantly, it's subject to error based on the excitement and the adrenaline and other riders overtaking you. It's very easy to ride too hard, especially at the start. So miracles don't happen very often, and it's unlikely you'll be much stronger at the Marmotte than you were in training or at other events. That's why this quote from Alan Couzens makes a lot of sense. Your race pace needs to be derived from evidence and not from hope and adrenaline on the day. Okay, so let's look at how you can use the evidence to create a pacing plan for yourself. The best evidence comes from your power meter, if you've got one, assuming it's always calibrated and the data is accurate. It tells you what you need to know. But what if you don't have a power meter? If you don't have a power meter, you can use VAM, which is your vertical speed in elevation meters per hour. And in the absence of wind and at speeds below about 15 kilometers per hour, this is very closely correlated to power. You can find this data on Strava after your ride, or you can see it in real time if you add VAM, and especially lap VAM, to your bike computer. You want to look for the longest possible climbs and see what you did. So in the example here, I did the Telegraph in 57 minutes and 23 seconds at 212 watts, and that corresponded to a VAM of 883 vertical meters per hour. Note that the VAM on the Galibier is misleading. It's not meaningful at all, or it's misleading, is better to say, because it includes the descent from the Telegraph to Valois. That's for the total segment from the bottom of the Maurienne Valley, Saint-Michel-de-Maurienne. So it includes the Telegraph, the descent to Valois, and the climb to the Galibier. So 712 doesn't mean a lot in this context. So take a long, steady climb with no descent in the middle of it in order to get a valid VAM. You can also, of course, use heart rate as an indicator. The heart rate is, of course, is measuring your internal load, and it's less reliable than power or VAM because it's influenced by many other factors such as stress, temperature, caffeine, dehydration, and so on. It's nevertheless a good idea to keep an eye on it, because if it's significantly higher than it should be, that may be telling you something. Finally, some people are sufficiently in tune with their feelings to get a good result just by feeling the level of effort. But to get this right takes a huge amount of experience. Okay, so it's easy to go wrong. Now let's come back to power and see how you can use the evidence of your past performance to plan your pacing at the Marmotte. You can use VAM to do the same logic. Here's an example using my data from 2019. I started by listing the recent events I'd ridden, which were Liège-Bastogne-Liège, the 3 cols, les 3 cols, the Time Megève, and the Grand Beau. So these gave me real-life data for the average power I'd sustained on the climbs during those events, so earlier in the year. The Time Megève and the Grand Beau were sub-max efforts, as noted there, simply because I was accompanying and coaching clients, so wasn't riding as hard as I possibly could. Based on these data, I decided to target the Marmotte at 210 watts, which was 76% of my FTP at the time, on the Glandon and the Telegraph. And then at 190, so 20 watts less, 69% of my FTP on the Galibier. That's to take account of the altitude. And then hope I could again manage 76% on Alpe d'Huez. It's really important for you to do this analysis for yourself, of course, and don't use my numbers. They could easily be either much too high or much too low for you. Note that even the percent FTP in watts per kilo is not easily transferable from one ride to another, because the higher your FTP per kilo, the less time you'll take on each climb, and therefore the higher your target percent of FTP can be. Okay, so let's see what happened with that plan. But just before showing you what happened in 2019, let me show you the consequences of failing to follow the plan in 2017. The yellow recording is my power in watts, and you can see the entire Marmotte on this page. My plan in 2017 was to ride the Glandon and the Telegraph at 80% of my FTP, reduce to 75% on the Galibier, and then finish on Alpe d'Huez at 80% again. So what happened? Well, here's what actually happened. I did manage an average of 80% on the Glandon, but I made the mistake of riding at 86% on the first part. It's split roughly into two with a descent in the middle. So I rode 86% for the first part, which was much too hard, and that forced me to slow down to about 74% on the second part. So the average turned out to be 80, but stupidly hard at the beginning. From there, things only got worse. And by the time I got to Alpe d'Huez, I could only manage 69% of my FTP. So the result was a significantly lower overall time than if I'd paced it better on the Glandon. The lesson from this is stick to the plan and don't start too fast. So let's look now at what happened in 2019. Here's my power meter recording from 2019, together with the plan to ride all the climbs at 76% except the Galibier at 69%. That was what I explained a few minutes ago. So what happened? This time my pacing on the Glandon, the Telegraph, and the Galibier were just about perfect. I really don't think I could have done much better than that. The result was that I arrived at Bourg d'Oisans feeling very proud of myself and sure that I was on a great day, ready to hit the final climb hard and fast and get a fantastic result. So that's exactly what I did. I hit the bottom of Alpe d'Huez hard and fast. And that was a massive pacing error. I hit it way too hard. Once again, the lesson is stick to the plan. Treat the first 3 kilometers on Alpe d'Huez with a lot of respect and take it easy. The ramps here, again, they're at 11 to 12%, and they can easily feel like much worse. If you've got anything less, you can pick up the pace progressively after the village, where the slope eases off to a more manageable 7 to 8%. So I must have, I forget now, but I must have hit those, I hit that at least 20 or 30 watts too hard at the bottom of Alpe d'Huez. Very stupid. Let's look now at fueling. Whether you get this right or wrong will have a massive impact on your performance, just as much as your pacing. The first point is you need to start with a full tank of glycogen in your muscles. You do this by carb loading. There's no need to be obsessive about it. Just eat an extra serving of carbs per meal on the Thursday and Friday before the Marmotte, and then eat normally on Saturday. Now, you don't want to go to sleep Saturday night with your stomach absolutely full. Remember to compensate for the extra calories by eating less fat on these 2 days. So cut down on butter, oil, cheese, fatty meats, and so on and so forth. If you're eating a lot of pasta, go easy on the olive oil and the parmesan. Now, on the day itself, be aware that you're likely to consume somewhere around 5,000 calories of energy during the Marmotte. By consume, I mean burn. You're going to use 5,000 calories of energy to get around, as well as the 2,000 or so if you're a man, which is keeping you alive during the day. Women, it's a bit less, 17 or 1800. It's really hard to consume this much while cycling hard, to eat it. Current recommendations are that from the start, you should aim at consuming at least 60 grams of carbohydrate per hour, which is about 240 calories, and perhaps as much as 120 grams per hour, which is almost 500 calories per hour, if you can. This means 2 to 4 typical, 2 for 60, 4 for 120, typical items of food, gels, or energy drinks per hour. Because a typical bottle of energy drink is 30 grams of carbohydrates, a typical gel is between 20 and 30, and so on and so forth. Be aware that many commercial energy bars, by this I'm not talking specific sports bars, but stuff you get in a supermarket, have as many, if not more, of their calories in the form of fat rather than carbohydrate. So this isn't much use at a Gran Fondo. So look for 25 to 30 grams of carbs as opposed to just reading the amount of calories, okay? The actual amount you can consume depends on what you're used to doing in training. It's not easy to digest and make use of 120 grams an hour while you're riding hard. It really is not easy. So if you haven't practiced it, don't attempt it at the event. There's a little bit of time left. You might try increasing what you normally take during your final training rides and see what happens. But don't try it for the first time at the event. You should definitely see 60 grams of carbs, or roughly 2 items per hour, as the minimum. Now, if you add up all the nutrition on this plan, the immediate question is, how on earth do I carry all of that? Well, Cavendish shows how much you can carry in your pockets if you really stuff them. And you can augment this, of course, with a bag on your top tube or under your handlebars. Don't be shy. I know it may not be very aesthetic, but if it's going to help you get around, don't be shy. You can, of course, pick up extra food at the feed stations, but to do this, you have to stop. Okay, you have to stop anyway for water. Well, so why not for food? Well, there are two problems with this. One, you may not find what you want at the feed station. And secondly, you will definitely lose time and potentially quite a lot of time if there's a lot of people in front of you. Sometimes there's a huge crowd around the feed station, and you can literally lose 10 to 15 minutes trying to get what you need. So if getting your best result is important to you, find a way to carry all the foods you'll need, whether it be in the form of gels or whatever, and stop for water at the water fountains, public water fountains, elsewhere than the main feed stations. There are plenty around the course, and if you do a search on the internet, you can even find some. There's a site where you can find them quite easily. There are three in the middle of Valois, for example, which are quite easy to find. Now we can pull all of this together into a race plan. This is the first part of an example plan for a total ride time of 8.5 to 9 hours, including the untimed descent of the Glandon and brief stops to pick up extra water. Don't just copy this plan, but think it through carefully and adapt it to your own level and experience and what you need. I'm just giving it to you as an example. The first section then is the start, which is the 15 kilometers from the start line itself to the beginning of the Glandon. This will take most riders about 30 minutes. A good tactic here is to pick a good wheel to follow and make sure the pace is sustainable without burning too many matches. In terms of nutrition, you might take a 30-gram gel, perhaps just 2 minutes before the start, literally just a couple of minutes. Don't take it 15 minutes before, because it may create an insulin spike, which you don't want. So take it just before the start, and then it will be absorbed and immediately used. And then drink a third of a bottle of water during the 30 minutes. Next is the long two-part climb to the summit of the Glandon. As we saw earlier, it's really important not to start up the Glandon too hard, and you must get your nutrition and hydration right so that you don't fall behind in terms of nutrition and hydration. Because once you've fallen behind, you can never catch up again. There's not much to say about the descent, which is untimed, other than be prudent. There's no point whatsoever in trying to gain 30 seconds on the descent. You'll just take risks. And literally every year I see accidents on the descent of the Glandon, which again is untimed. There's no point in trying to descend super fast. So descend at a safe pace, eat, drink, and get to the bottom safely and having eaten and drunk, and then you're ready for the long ride up the valley. Take the opportunity to eat some solid, easily digestible food like dried fruit or an energy bar, because that's much harder to get down when you're pushing hard up the valley or climbing the Glandon or the Telegraph. Here's the rest of the plan, which I'm not going to comment in detail, because in any case, again, you need to adapt it for yourself. Remember, failing to plan is planning to fail, so it's well worth going through the effort of writing something like this out for yourself. But planning is not enough. You also need to stick to the plan. Okay, so how do you do that? How do you remember it? Well, here we can learn from the pros. Once again, this is Mathieu van der Poel's nutrition sticker from the Tour of Flanders a couple of years ago. The plan was to consume upwards of 100 grams of carbs per hour. On that sticker, the circles are rice cakes, the rectangles are energy bars, the gel icons are gels, obviously, and the bottles are bottles of energy drink. So you can copy this idea for yourself, create something similar, and then stick it on your stem so you've got it in front of you. That way you're not going to forget what's important. So let's recap. There are two essential things to get right, which are pacing and fueling. Both of these require careful planning and then above all, sticking to the plan. If you follow the recommendations I just explained, you should be pretty close. Do be aware, however, that the Marmotte is extremely challenging to get right, and many people, including myself, are still trying after 5 or more attempts. That's what keeps us coming back. That's what makes it a really great event. So that's it for this evening's presentation. If you'd like more tips for the Marmotte, you can check out my presentation on YouTube from 2022, if you haven't done already, which includes 5 mistakes to avoid and 5 go faster tips. For now, this is Marvin saying thank you for listening. Stay safe and good luck.